Burnout is not just how we relate to others, it's how we relate to ourselves.
Oh, interesting.
And so we're going to dive into Elijah in a minute, but practically speaking, when I encounter someone who is presenting burnout, the first thing I want to ask them is, where's their safety net? Who are the people that have permission to speak into their lives and to come alongside them? I don't think you can pull out of burnout by yourself.
When I say the word burnout, what comes to your mind? While it's not a new phenomenon, burnout of all types, emotional, physical, vocational, spiritual, seems to be dangerously on the rise. But into this moment speaks Jesus with a glorious invitation. Come to me, all you who are weary. I'm Bill Gorman, campus pastor at the Brookside campus.
And I'm Paul Brandis, campus pastor at the Shawnee campus. And today on the Form.Life podcast, I'm joined by our lead senior pastor, Tom Nelson, and his wife, Liz Nelson, a clinically licensed professional counselor. And together, the three of us dive into this important topic, seeking to peel back the layers on burnout and chart a better way forward in the easy, light yoke of Jesus.
Yeah, that's right, Paul. And I know I was especially helped by how practical this episode was, especially when you get to Tom and Liz starting to break down the importance of thinking through pace, patterns, and people. I can't wait for everyone to hear that. So let's join the conversation right now.
Well, Tom and Liz, it is so good to be back with you on the Form.Life podcast together. Thank you for, I know, this is so fun. Thank you for making time once again to join us for a really important conversation.
Yes.
Yeah, it's good to have you here.
Thank you.
Today, we're talking about the topic of burnout, which is something, Liz, as a counselor, I know you're seeing in many of your clients. And then Tom, as a pastor, as pastors, something that we're seeing as well in our congregants and parishioners. And actually, you included a chapter on this topic. You have kind of Work Matters 2.0. The new title for that book is Why Your Work Matters. Subtitle there is How God Uses Our Everyday Vocations to Transform Us, Our Neighbors, and the World. And this is in the book.
This is a chapter.
Yeah, it's one of the new. A lot of that book is fresh.
Most of it is new.
Most of it's new. Yeah. And so that has an April of 2025 release date. We actually have an episode on the Form.Life podcast where we get you in conversation, talking with Bill and Johnny Daigle, works for us and for Made to Flourish. So excited about that. But this is an important topic and one that, I don't know that any of the three of us would say we are personally experts on this, but I'm glad to be here to discuss it with you today. So I'd love to start just by defining our terms and framing the conversation a bit. And so Liz, let's start with you and begin from the counseling perspective. So with your clients, what are you seeing and how might you introduce this topic for our listeners?
Yeah, I think it's important to take burnout and not look at it like it's a crisis and a destination. It's a spectrum. So if we frame it that way, we can catch symptoms or presentations early in the game so that we can give attention to the places and the people that could really help remedy this. But burnout is definitely on the increase. I mean, there's all kinds of validation scientifically that it is wearing us down. It is ruining our health. It can ruin individual economic scenarios. But most of all, I would put it on a spectrum. I would say burnout is not just how we relate to others, it's how we relate to ourselves.
Oh, interesting.
And so we're going to dive into Elijah in a minute, but practically speaking, when I encounter someone who is presenting burnout, the first thing I want to ask them is, where's their safety net? Who are the people that have permission to speak into their lives and to come alongside them? I don't think you can pull out of burnout by yourself.
Almost like quicksand a little bit.
Yeah.
That's a good
exactly.
image.
That's a beautiful, beautiful example. And but a safety net would include those people who know your heart, who are closest to you. They could also be a physician. When's the last time you've seen someone for just your entirety of your well-being?
Yeah.
It could also be your financial planner. Like, this is a person who needs to speak truth and reality, a reality check there. But best friends, relatives, those people who know you best and who can see the change, they are recognizing there's distress and there are alarms going off. And they have the permission to speak into your life. And most people do not have a safety net. Like, we really need to think that through. Who are the people we trust that if we hit rock bottom, they aren't going to walk out the door on us? They're going to listen well, they're going to pay attention, and they're going to journey with us in our recovery. But I'd put it on a spectrum. So start taking those walks with people that listen well when the first signs of, like, I think I'm in over my head. I'm really, it's hard to catch my breath these days. When those statements start showing up, we should be
notice.
Yeah, that's a great question. I put together something that'll be on the link.
Yeah.
That are just a catch-all of symptoms or presentations, but it depends on, and this gets a little into attachment language, but it really depends on how their relationship with Christ is. I mean, if they're a believer, and if that's secure. Do they believe that He is accepting them unconditionally? Do they believe that He has a loyal love? Do they believe that there is comfort and joy and beauty found in Him? And so that is what the soul needs most, is that secure relationship with God. When burnout is on the brink, that is what we all, as humans, need most, is that very tender and trusting relationship, transparent relationship with God Himself.
So I'm hearing, in addition to just sort of a general, like, overwhelmed nature, or I might be in over my head, or experiencing some anxiety, which is part of what your handout talks about, is the connection between anxiety and burnout, but also maybe doubt or increasing doubts about where I stand with God. I'm hearing that as well as a potential early sign, which is
an avoidance of God. You know, a minimizing of His work and presence, and a lack of attending. We use a lot of the language, like, we're going to brainstorm, and I love that, because we're going to solve problems, we're going to point to things, we're going to get this figured out. And I keep telling Tom I make up words, so here we go. But we need to soul storm. We need to say, I don't understand where these doubts are coming from. Elijah actually does this for us here. So, but I don't even know who I am and what I'm supposed to. Where's the transformation? I'm not seeing you show up, God. You know, those soul storming, not just brainstorming.
Oh, I love that. Well, and I think that, you know, those doubts about God, or wondering, or avoidance of, is something we see when we get to meet with our congregants as pastors, Tom. So what would you add as like an introductory framing from a pastoral or theological perspective on the topic of burnout?
Well, a couple of things. I love our conversation. You know, as a mental health professional, Liz is affirming what the scriptures teach anthropologically, that we're holistic beings.
That's right.
And we talk a lot at Christ about Tom Tamim, which is its integral life.
Yes. The connected life.
I think we look at burnout multifaceted. I think that's what Liz as a mental health professional is saying. There are many aspects to burnout and different contributing factors. So I think that's really important, just as we frame this conversation.
Right, of course.
And I think theologically, and I'll say practically, when I think I've had a long tenure as a pastor, right? And I don't ever remember in my early years of pastoring where there was the level of conversation around burnout. And I think across the spectrum of mental health professionals who work in the caring kind of places, there is a shocking amplification of that in people's lives. And so there are many factors at work, I think, that we need to be discerning, but be attentive to so many people facing it at whatever spectrum they're at. Let me just give you one example. Just recently, a neighbor, we love our neighbors, our actual neighbors, and we were having a little conversation over the fence about the Royals, the Chiefs, about our favorite barbecue. I mean, it's just a lovely neighbor.
It's like a very Kansas City neighborly conversation.
You would expect me, if you know me, to say, well, how's your work going, your paid work?
Yeah, that's right.
And I know kind of what he does as a consultant and business, that sort of thing. And he right away said, Tom, I'm really burned out on it.
Wow.
Isn't that something?
He used the language?
Use those exact words. So allow me just press in. And I don't have the safety and freedom to ask lots of questions yet.
Sure.
But it was right on his lips.
Yeah.
Right? So it's a really big, common conversation, not only as followers of Jesus, but in our broader culture. It's an avenue of connection, an avenue of neighborly love, and an avenue of opportunity to really serve many people that are really struggling with it in unprecedented ways.
Yeah. Well, yes. And so we talk about COVID and the sort of once in a generation sort of impact of that or other factors that have led to this. And certainly there's a relevance there. But we can trace back to this as a quote unquote old problem too, right?
Yes.
And Liz, you mentioned a couple times one of the places where we've mined the scriptures for some learning in a couple different settings. We've gotten to do this is 1 Kings 19, the great prophet Elijah, who stood boldly and declared God's truth in just a enormously difficult moment, and to people that wanted to literally kill him and had all the power and the ability to do that. And that's a tough Monday job. I don't know. I mean, there's days I struggle in my Monday work. We all struggle in our Monday work. I've never had a day quite like Elijah.
It's hard to be a prophet.
I know.
Hard job.
I know. And so 1 Kings 19, Tom, can you remind us a bit and take us through first? What's happening there? Yeah, set the scene for us a bit.
Yeah, just briefly. I mean, Elijah is this amazing prophet in a really difficult time, difficult culture. And
very
he
hostile
takes
to
an idolatrous culture, and he
right.
takes on the prophets of Baal and Jezebel, this powerful woman, this queen.
Yeah.
And he actually has a remarkable victory, literally on a mountain, on Mount Carmel, and shows God's supremacy over all idolatry. So he has this mountaintop victory, but he exerts incredible amount of energy and adrenaline and spiritual resources on that mountain. And then right after that, Jezebel says, basically, you're dead. I have a contract on you. You're out of here. And he runs. He's exhausted. He's depleted. He runs out of fear. And I'll let Liz talk more about all the psychological aspects, but he finds himself, out in this wilderness space, and he's completely depleted. That's what I'd say, depleted, exhausted. And so we have a picture of a burnt out prophet.
Yeah.
And there's some wonderful insights, I think, in the text that helps us understand what burnout is and then how God helps us and what are our path forward to deal with burnout in our life.
Yeah. Well, and I kind of wondered about the question, Liz, if Elijah booked a session with you, somehow you were able, that's his presenting issue. What would your treatment plan be? Or how would you think about getting to have that kind of a moment with him or conversation with him? I also know one of the things we've talked about as we were preparing for this is how, and you see this in Elijah, he actually increases his own isolation. He has a trusted servant, and in verse 3 of 19, he leaves the servant behind and continues in Mount Carmel, and then he ends up in the valley under the broom tree. It's like from the mountain to the valley, increasing isolation. So maybe that would be one of the thoughts in the session is you've already mentioned the importance of a safety net. He seems to not maybe be taking that advice so well, but he does end up going from the Mount Carmel to the valley to Mount Horeb and ends up with God there. So he does pursue, God pursues him, he pursues God. But if he was in your office, how would you approach that? Where would you take that? What do you see when you look at that text? I'm fascinated.
Yeah. Well, you bring out such a great point. I think he is weary from loneliness. I mean, he states the loneliness to God when God does show up. But you're right. He does leave his closest person to him. And there's a couple of things in that. One, when you've just tackled the biggest obstacle you'll probably face in your life. Like, we need people to celebrate with us too. Yeah. I mean, burnout, is not there just because hard times have shown up or schedules have really taken over. It's also because we don't praise God and celebrate and say, this is something that is life-altering, and I'm not going to pass up dancing and cheering and whatever you do when you celebrate. We do what?
Yoo-hoo. Dallas would say.
I guess so. Yeah, that's right. Whoopee. That's right. Whoopee. That's it. That's it.
Whoopee.
But he's weary in his loneliness.
Yes.
He's very in need of the nurturing kind of care. I think God is modeling there what we can participate in when people are at that crisis of burnout. That I would say is on that spectrum. That's a crisis of burnout.
That's right.
That's not sustainable at all.
Right.
And at that point, too, I think God is modeling for us how to attend to someone. It's not just come and pray with them. It's like, here's a meal. Yeah. Here's some shade. Please get comfortable. What else? How can I serve you in ways that your body, your heart, your mind, your soul so desperately need?
I love that insight, Liz, because people have often said God's answer to burnout was a nap and a sack.
A nap and a snack.
Yes,
yeah.
But the practical
that's right.
reality that we are embodied creatures in very practical ways. Yeah. I just love that, Liz.
And we never outgrow the need to feel nurtured and cared for.
And tended to.
Oh, yes, yeah. But I do think it's later that Elijah reaches out for God in that secure relationship, knowing that God is fully trustworthy and capable of all that he is calling Elijah to. And that's when he hears God's presence in the silence.
That's right.
Mm-hmm. So it's not the fire, it's not the earthquake, it's later. And then right after that, you hear an even more transparent heart show up from Elijah. So he is entrusting himself in ways and verbalizing it, acknowledging it, living into it in ways that maybe he hadn't before. We don't have the entire, transcript there, but it's after all of that he kind of comes to his senses and addresses God and shares in a more, a deeper way what he's experiencing. He went to the right person,
and is recommissioned into his work.
Exactly.
He's given sort of a time horizon. It's named that Elisha he will get to raise him up into leadership, but he is recommissioned into his work. You could almost imagine God saying, "Well, okay, you have done your job here, and you can quit your job as a prophet or something." And maybe there would be times where we would counsel or encourage someone to make a change like that when they're facing burnout, but it's not what happens for Elijah. He's recommissioned.
He is recommissioned, and one of the things that we appreciate because we've studied and lived in Israel for a long time ago, is the geography in that text. Because God invites him for a long walk. Right. In our age, flying on planes and the speed of life, there's a time for him to recover physically, spiritually. I mean, this is just, it's
extraordinary.
It's not like instant. Right. He has time to recover that God gives him as he walks and moves back to this next place of commissioning. So I just want to add that.
100%, because when I preached this last, it was right around when Christ Community had generously given me a sabbatical, which is part of our rhythm. We talk about engagement and withdrawal, and you can't imagine almost a more intense engagement than Mount Carmel and the experience with the prophets of Baal. And then there's this, I said in the sermon when we preached on it, I was sharing about my sabbatical. And I was like, what Elijah gets, he gets a prophet sabbatical. Like, this is what God gives him: a nap, a snack, and a sabbatical, and tends to him and pursues him, but then eventually does recommission him, which is why I think it's so thoughtful to include a book on work, including a chapter on burnout, but there's a dynamic and kind of an interplay there, and we even do see it, I think, pretty beautifully in the story of Elijah. So any other thoughts on him or his story or what we can glean from that text? It's if people haven't read that, if listeners haven't read that in a while, spend some time with 1 Kings 18 and 19. It's really powerful. Great. Any final thoughts there? Oh, that's great. Well, I know that the two of you, and this, I just love thinking about this, getting opportunities to pour into other leaders and pastors, nonprofit leaders, that this has been, as we've seen, an unprecedented amount of people, both followers of Jesus and not, struggle with burnout. People have asked you to come and do a little bit of teaching. And again, I know both of you would say you're fellow strugglers in the journey here, but as you've had a chance to do that, and I've benefited from this in a couple different spaces, you have talked about a helpful framework for guardrails around preventing burnout, or maybe even if you're experiencing some of the early signs of it, or you're kind of in the not quite crisis danger zone part of the spectrum. But it's 3 Ps, and it's pace.
That's a typical pastor.
That's right, exactly.
That's how I remember it.
That's right. 3 Ps: pace, patterns, and people. Pace, patterns, and people. And we've hit maybe a little bit on some of the what's underneath the hood on each of those here. But Liz, I wonder, could you give a high-level summary of each of those guardrails? Pace, patterns, and people.
Yeah. So I'm going to throw in another.
Oh, please. Let's do it.
Triggers. So when a person is experiencing, if they're on that spectrum of burnout, we all have places in our lives that are kind of tender. We're a little bit vulnerable there. We have ways that we protect and guard and live into. And what I see is triggers are becoming epic in a person's life. What they used to be able to attend to and live a joyful, confident life are now showing up almost like landmines. And so, again, you can take that beautiful, secure relationship with God, and that is the ideal relationship for us to move towards with each other. But that feels up for grabs in burnout. Like, people aren't safe. And triggers really show up. And I'm sometimes so surprised at something you and I would feel like is something you just kind of, pass on. That's not that big a deal.
Yeah.
And someone has just come unglued. Or they burst into tears, or they walk out of the room. I mean, it shouldn't be a moment that has such an overreaction. And so when a person is moving in the direction of burnout, they're not responding, they're reacting. And that's the trigger showing up, that especially actually in the people's lives who are closest to them. And so you begin to recognize, we can have a pace that doesn't make sense, and places and people, but all of that can be landmines to them. Every one of those places can suddenly become not safe. So maybe if you want to talk about those three, I could.
Just a little. That's really good, Liz. I think that's really insightful. So we've used pace, pattern, and people as just a guideline or a guardrail. The pace piece is that there's lots of reasons why we run too hard. And we've talked a lot about eliminating hurry, the peril of hurry. But I think underlying a pace that's too fast in your life, there's a lot that drives that. And I don't have time to unpack all of that, internal, external. But I think a couple things are important as followers of Jesus. Is that, first of all, God does not expect or give us more to do than we can handle. I mean, fundamentally. And most of that pace that's unsustainable, too hard, burns us out, exhausts us, is driven by other false ideas or impoverished ideas about ourselves, about life. And so I just want to say that, first of all. Secondly, is that we were created in creation, even before the fall, with human limits.
Oh, yeah.
And one of the big things in my own life, just trying to navigate this, and I haven't done this perfectly. I've been on the edge of burnout, and Liz could tell you that. I mean, maybe I've been burnt out. I don't know, but I've struggled with pace. And I can give you all kinds of reasons, internal, external, of why I have. But too fast of a pace is often tied to the idea that my time, space, embodied limits are a barrier to live a flourishing, godly life that pleases God, rather than to see them as we should see limits, as a gift from God.
God-given gift,
versus barriers to the good life, to the life of apprenticeship. So I would just want to highlight, I think so much of pace internally as Christians, we've got to evaluate what drives that. And I think we should, first of all, understand that God does not expect or ask me to do much any more than I could handle with a very healthy way to handle it. Most of that's driven by other factors. And then we have creation limits, and that's a good thing, not a barrier, not an obstacle to pleasing God or whatever stuff we're dealing with. I think those two things I just want to suggest on the area of pacing. We can talk about patterns in people, but I think the pace that we have and our culture allows us now, because of technology and our lack of connection to seasons and rhythms, to live a crazy pace.
Yeah. Well, and when we're doing that, when we're running too fast, I've been chewing on the fourth one you added, Liz, about triggers. And as I was listening to you, it felt like the next step to encourage was, again, sort of say to people humbly, seek to know in prayer and in community what your triggers might be. That feels like the next step there is, if you, and I see this in pastoral ministry a lot when I'm with congregants, it's like, if you didn't know the hard thing was going to come, then not only are you dealing with the hard thing, but you're experiencing emotional and spiritual whiplash, which is also a hard thing. And so then you have a multi-layered hard thing because you've got the hard thing and you've got the response, where if we can thoughtfully in prayer and community identify and know what our various triggers or landmines might be, we're going to be set up better to have these guardrails of pace, patterns, and people in place. But if we're running too fast, we're not going to slow down.
We're not going to see it.
In thoughtful conversation, in community, to understand what they might be, and then all of those, the pace, the patterns, the people might actually be filled with landmines in the end and be problematic.
And what we try to say in patterns, there's many things we can talk about, but we use language, at least 3 S's. I think of that like the weekly Sabbath. I think that I've said this before. I've confessed that before. God designed us for a day of Sabbath every week. And I think one of the most important God-honoring things we can do is to build that in our life in a regular pattern. So much of burnout that I encounter in my own life or others is to neglect God's design for Sabbath. So that's just a very practical, biblical design reality is weekly build into your life. And you can do it with discipline and protections and intention. Build a Sabbath. Secondly, sleep. We talk a lot about the importance, the need for good sleep, right? And there's a conversation.
We've done a whole episode on the podcast about that
It's not so basic. Right?
No, I know.
But all of us, regardless of vocation or age of life, we can build in a Sabbath and build sleep patterns, right? And then understanding the particular joys and challenges of the season you're in life. Those 3 things at least help us, I think, build healthy patterns or rhythms of apprenticeship with Jesus that are God-honoring, tied to creation and redemption.
So in patterns, we want to think about Sabbath, we want to think about sleep, and we want to think about seasons. And that seasonality point is key. I mean, even I think sitting with the two of you, and then I'm here, and I've got a 9 and a 7 and a 3-year-old. But you're entering a grandparent journey, and so there are just different seasons, and thinking well about what that means, even for Sabbath and sleep and giving grace while still keeping those overall patterns. And then people. So pace, patterns, and people. And Liz, I know I've heard you talk about kind of a coin metaphor here that is just sticks with me. So I'd love if you could explain a little bit about that. And you've already mentioned the vital need for a safety net within this conversation of burnout. So bring some of that back in for us and talk about the importance of people.
Well, so to be more fully known over time with individuals that draw you and the relationship towards that secure relationship with Christ. It begins, lives are transformed together as you do life together. Each is each other's reality check. And I think for Tom and I, we can recognize fairly easily now having a group of people that know us well enough. When there's a crisis in our lives, they will say, we're coming over to pray. We won't let you be in this alone. That kind of friendship is so rare and so amazing. And but they also know this about us, which is our triggers, which are our soft spots. When Tom is pressed and there's
I'm
too
never
much
pressed.
going on. Too much going on.
Guilty as charged. Huh?
He steps on the gas. He works
I run
even harder.
harder.
The pace goes
Yep,
up.
he does. And so why would he do that? Because he feels more secure. So go back to that. All of us long for this security with Christ. And somehow in the patterns, probably developmental years, people have influenced us our whole lives. I'm thinking the Dairy Queen right now. His first job.
I know.
Okay.
I know. The
Yeah, but
Minnesota.
yes,
I put a lot of hours in that
I
thing.
know.
Anyway.
but when life gets hard, he steps on the gas. And so people who know him well will come and say, whoa, 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 whoa.
Wow.
Let's do some things outside of work. Let's take in some beauty. Let's do
Go
some
for
things.
a run.
Yeah, yeah. And for me, I tend to co-sign my happiness to others, meaning if they aren't happy, I can't be happy. If their well-being is intact, my well-being can't be intact. Like, I don't mean to do that. It just moves in that direction unless it's caught. I will have a person in my life who is scrambling and who is, devastating things going on. And I feel like I co-sign on them. Like, I take responsibility for their happiness. And so the beauty and the joy and the hope and the life-giving options, that just isn't even showing up on my radar screen. And I have to be reminded that I am not responsible for their happiness and joy. I can join them in their sadness or sorrow, grief. I can be with them in that, but it is God who co-signs in the yoke, not me. And so I have to, that's a continual place that we know about each other and can catch those.
It sounds like others do too.
Yeah.
Others know that about you as
So
well.
Liz, you have a lot of relational gifts and emotional intelligence. Do unpack a little of the currency metaphor, because that's been so helpful to me.
I know, me too.
And so many. About like people. How do you think about the people in your life and this, the differentiation? That's really helpful.
Well, if God's your dollar bill, that's such an awful sounding.
No, I really like.
But if God's your dollar bill,
I know where you're
dollar
going.
bill.
But I know where you're going. I know where you're going. That's good. Yeah,
and He's
it's
our
good.
secure relationship that is perfect and beautiful and wonderful. Every one of us as humans need 3 or 4 people, quarters in our lives that their lives draw us even more towards Christ. And our lives are transforming each other's lives. And there are those same characteristics of trust and loyalty and vulnerability, transparency, comfort, joy, fully accepted, that is growing and deepening in those relationships. It's never perfect like God, but it is deepening. It is a deep dive. I ask people not to, it's not that we want to place high expectations. We want to place deeper longings into these relationships that become known. So there's your 4 quarters. They can finish your sentences. They would never walk out of the room on you.
Really
They're in there for good. And yet, those can change over a lifetime. I mean, the same 4, 3, 4 are not the same always. They aren't.
Kind of the point of seasons within patterns is that sometimes true. Yep, makes sense.
Exactly. And then we have our dimes.
10 dimes.
Yeah. These are the people we just do life with.
Yeah.
They're our first call to go have fun, go to the state fair, sit on the same bench at a basketball game, whatever it is. They're the folks that are life-giving, but we can also join each other in the places of need, and we're aware and we're committed, but they don't know our souls quite like the 4 quarters. And then pennies. These are
100 pennies, sure.
people in our life. We know their names. We get to enjoy their presence, but they don't influence us. We don't go, oh, I can't believe that's what they thought about that. They are not impactful. They have beautiful places of engagement in our lives, but they're not shaping us. We don't give them that role in our lives. And what I mean by that is, if we had 100 people and we needed to know how they felt and thought and responded to, we would be undone quickly. So they're important, but they're not. They're not the people that shape our lives.
No, it's a powerful metaphor, and one I think we see in the life of Jesus.
Indeed.
I mean, we know that, again, all metaphors break down to a certain point, but nobody had a better dollar bill relationship with God the Father.
Yeah.
And even when you got kind of the 10 dimes of the apostles and the disciples, but then even within that,
inner
you've got
circle.
an inner three, you got a quarter. I mean, and obviously there was much engagement with kind of 100 pennies idea there with broader group of disciples beyond just the 12, as well as then the crowds and others that came. So I think there is really something there. And I think when I first heard that from you, I just thought back over my own life. It's like, oh, there's an intuitiveness to that is so compelling and connected. It's like, oh yeah, I can think about and see how this quarter in my life has kind of pulled me back, or has said, hey, Paul, you're stepping on the gas. Your pace is increasing.
I think on that metaphor, again, we don't know perfectly, but I think if you are married or currently married, right? God's design. I'll just use $50, so beyond the quarter, right? I mean, there's a place that ideally you have security and you can be real and be known. And anyway, so that's, throw that out there. Those who are called to marriage.
That's great. Yeah. Well, Liz, you kind of shared a little bit in this way already, but I just, knowing I was going to be sitting with you two, and even for both of you, knowing your love for Psalm 23, the Good Shepherd, we have all we need. But there's a translation that talks about in the second verse, leads us, he makes us lie down beside quiet waters, makes us lie down, leads us beside still waters. And there's a translation, still waters of rest. And so just like, I love kind of looking at different translations of Psalm 23, and you've shared a little bit about where is Jesus, our good shepherd, leading you individually, like right now in this whole conversation? Where do you find him saying to you, hey, Tom, hey, Liz, like, I'm your good shepherd. I'm going to give you what you need. I'm going to lead you beside a quiet waters of rest in this way. Anything you would be able to share? And I already have shared vulnerably, but anything that comes to mind for right now in your life and heart and soul? Yeah.
Well, I would say becoming a grandparent forces rest. You would think it forces activity, and it will.
It does, sure. Yeah, engagement and withdrawal.
But to see rocking an infant, being there for hours, and strolling for an hour. I mean, these places where it is quiet and it is a pace that is just slow as could be. I mean, now we got a crawler, so that pace is picking up. But a season of more prayer, and I think more curiosity about God is showing up, and more for me, and more what does life-giving really mean, and how does Christ, how does he journey with us in these places that are so life-altering? And so lots of time to think and be curious and even ponder things. Honestly, if there hadn't been this time of rest, some of these thoughts and these curiosities would not have come to the surface.
Right.
The time, is just spent in other ways. And so, and we talk about that sometimes about, man, never saw it that way before, never thought of it, haven't encountered. That comes up a lot when there is that much focus. I mean, that much change, I guess, in our lives.
Oh, thank you. That's a beautiful answer. Yeah.
Yeah, that is. And she's amazing at answers, beautiful answers, isn't she?
Yes.
Yeah, a couple of things come to my mind that might be helpful in using season metaphor, because we are in a different season in multiple aspects of our vocation, work with Christ community. I mean, just these are liminal spaces of transition and opportunity, but change. So just broadly, but I'd say personally in that, along with Liz's articulation of sort of rest brings curiosity and some of the richness of that. Along with that is truly a couple things for me. Is one is this is a season where I'm much more focused on listening than speaking. I'm doing a lot of talking right now, but I'm more drawn to listening in this season. And that's increasingly important to me. Along with that is that even though much of my calling and maybe my personality is more introversion, a person in my calling has been highly extroverted in terms of lots of people. And I do care for people, so I don't want to communicate the wrong thing. But recently, having a little time of rest reminded me that this is a season where I'm not as much with people, but I'm never alone. And that's really important to me in my own journey of cultivating that presence with God, that rest is a time of that's more real, can I say that, and more regular, and I'm more attentive to that presence than I am to people's presence.
I love that. Thank you both for sharing. Any final encouragements as we wrap up for the listeners, but maybe even particularly for the one who is currently burned out? I'm thinking of your neighbor, Tom, or for one who feels like they're on the early end of the spectrum or they're just about there. What final encouragements would you offer to them here and now?
Go ahead.
I guess a couple things come to my mind. One is God is so gracious to us wherever we are, and loves us so dearly, and understands us and gets us. I mean, that God knows what we're feeling, what we're experiencing, what's gone before us, what's ahead of us. I mean, the Good Shepherd knows. And I think that helps us. But also, I want to encourage people to have the courage and faith to begin to make changes, to evaluate their life and begin to make changes in areas that will lead them to a path, not of burnout, but of flourishing and joy. And so much of our lives, we do have choices, right? Choices of our schedule, our priorities, and God is gracious to help nudge us in that direction. I like the word nudge. I don't think it's a heavy yoke, but to nudge us. So what's a couple steps? First of all, know God's deep love and experience that and ask Him to be real to you and delight in that wherever you are. But then what are some nudges that would be wise to move forward to a more healthy pace, a better pattern, some friendships you can develop?
Some trusted people. Yeah, that's great. Liz, anything to add there?
Yeah. I think what's become increasingly a focus is to be aware of what's life-giving. And, there's an assessment, a survey anyone can take on what it is that or a handful of things where they feel God's presence most powerfully. And I think for Tom, it's probably nature, quiet, a good book as well. And, but in addition to that, it can be anything and everything. I mean, you think of Eric Little. It was when he ran. Well, Tom runs. He continues to run a handful of miles every day. And I know that these are places that are life-giving to him. But we all need to have, it could be gardening. It could be, we were out last night because it's life-giving and because we're star weirdos. We were out looking for the comet last night.
We didn't find
with
it.
Our little
we couldn't
apps
see it.
But that is life-giving to know what's going on in the sky to us. And I'm going to see the Aurora Borealis sometime in my life.
That's one of our goals.
Give me a call. I'm on my way. Yep. But just to know what is life-giving and don't minimize that.
Yeah.
Like make that
good
something that you,
God.
that you just run after and cherish.
And there can be some small spaces too, obviously long vacations or other fun, but there are little small spaces in our day.
Yeah. Or even just make a discipline of sunset watching. The gorgeous ones, especially in the winter, right? In Kansas.
There's a great moonset
But
this morning.
What is life-giving? It can be music for some. Oh my goodness, it's endless.
Yeah.
But just to know what that is and practice that on a Sabbath. Because people think Sabbath, And we teased we were going to get Tom a shirt that said nothing for Sabbath, so that when he was asked, what have you been up to? Nothing. What are you going to do tomorrow?
Nothing is actually
Nothing.
very substantive something.
It is. That's
when
right.
we think about it in our worldview.
It is. Yeah.
Yeah, but it's just
nothing.
People think of the Sabbath and they think of, oh,
Yeah.
and so then what?
Right.
Oh no, that's your life-giving.
delight.
That's where the
Delight.
life-giving,
Delight.
exactly.
Delight and joy.
Where we
Celebration.
feel God's presence with us in ways that is different than the rest of the week.
Yeah, I'm going to go disc golfing this afternoon.
There you go.
I texted Ashley.
It's a perfect day when we're recording this.
I need to go
Beautiful
disc golfing today. It's like,
Yeah.
it is exactly that.
Yeah.
It's really, really beautiful, Liz. And just thank you both so much. I really treasure this conversation and
We do too.
just your humility in it and your expertise, but just how you have, I've seen in both of you efforts, spirit-empowered efforts to practice in these ways, and it's been inspiring to me. And you're both regular guests. We're getting ready to wrap up here. We've got a final question, but we've had the chance to ask it of both of you multiple times, and we love this question. We've never been disappointed. The normal question for the Form.Life podcast is, what would you do if you could do something beyond the amazing work you already do? But we have done that with both of you. So I thought, and I know you like this, which is why I wrote it down. I just want to know, what is your favorite flavor of ice cream? That is where I want to end
that's
today.
life-giving to me. I
Right,
love
there
ice
you
cream.
go. I knew you liked ice cream.
Gosh, I love ice cream.
Do you have a favorite flavor of ice cream? That's where I want to
For me,
end.
it's whatever I haven't tried yet.
Whatever. Okay. Oh, so you like the shops where you can just kind of go
whatever
wild,
I haven't tried.
and they have okay. That is great.
That is so Liz and her spontaneity
Right,
and
right,
adventure.
right,
I'm just saying this perfect.
I doubt
For
the
me,
answer's
I
the
have
same
one
for you.
answer.
Okay, right.
I love ice cream, lots of it, but it's mint chocolate chip's my favorite.
There it is. Oh my goodness.
How
Thank
about you, Paul?
I like a mint chocolate chip.
I
It's
love mint
good.
chocolate chip.
There was an Edie's or Eddie's ice cream. Eddie's, I think, double fudge brownie when I was growing up. My whole family loved it. And so not only is it a great flavor of ice cream, but there's something so familial about it for me. My mom and my dad and my sister and all four of us loving that brand and that type. And so that's, I think, still, I don't know. I think they might still make it. So I might have to get some of that and enjoy
I'm
it.
hopeful when I enter the new heavens and earth that there will be handed to me my favorite ice cream. Even better.
That's right. Yeah. So how could it be? But somehow it will be. Well, thank you both again so much. And we've mentioned a few links and resources. And so all of that will be here in the show notes. And thank you so much for joining us on another episode of the Form.Life podcast.